Yes, indeedy, folks. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Let's drive Moab. I took a drive down to Moab in March of 2007. It was a nice time to be there. It was overcast and cool, a great time to go out and check things out. In previous episodes, we've looked at the great drive down to Moab. We went on a little drive down Highway 279 down the river. We've gone out and checked out Dead Horse Point, a Utah state park, and we've also checked out Canyonlands National Park. On our last drive Moab, we began driving upriver up Highway 128. After going through a rather twisty and fun little canyon, we came to this wide open valley. Our drive today will take us through several unique features. This wide open valley goes by some crags where you're very close to the river, and then we see the Dewey Bridge and drive on up to the open desert. For now, let's take a little drive on this open valley with wonderful, wonderful rolling roads. Come to a narrow little spot where the canyon comes up to the river, and we find ourselves on a fun little road with lots of rocks coming down, practically pushing us into the river. The road runs right along the river and is carved out of these large rock tailings. There certainly are a lot of rocks up there still waiting to come down, and it does make you think about it while you drive along. road finally straightens out, becomes a little bit straighter, and we find ourselves at the Dewey Bridge. A rather pastoral place, I would say. We are on the south side of the river here, and just south of where these cows are enjoying themselves, and the calf is being curious about this guy with a camera, is the site of the old Dewey School. At the turn of the 20th century, the populations of southeast Utah were mostly in trade with populations in Colorado. So a route from Colorado to southeast Utah was very important. A ferry served to take people across the river at this site, and in 1904, Richard Westwood moved his family to Dewey to run the ferry. The Westwoods needed a school for their children, but there were not enough children to qualify for the county building a school. So Richard's wife Martha signed up for school. That qualified them, and in 1906, the county built a school on this site. The school was 16 by 24 feet, smaller than my rather small kitchen, made with board and planks, with dried muslin put in order to keep out the dust and the wind, used kind of like a tar paper, but on the inside. They had 9 pupils, and the school classes lasted for 3 months. The school lasted from 1906 until 1916, when the bridge was built and there was no longer need of a ferrymaster. The Westwoods moved to Moab. The school deteriorated for many, many years before it finally deteriorated to oblivion. The Dewey Bridge itself was something of an engineering accomplishment when they built it in 1916. It was built to hold 6 horses, 3 wagons, and 9,000 pounds of freight. In 1916, it was the second longest suspension bridge west of the Mississippi River. Even as late as 2008, this bridge was the longest suspension bridge in Utah and the longest single span or clear span in Utah. The bridge was restored in the year 2000 by the Grand County Historical Preservation Commission using donated funds. In 1986, the bridge was replaced by this bridge that crosses the river just a few hundred yards downstream. That is to say that this bridge, this little narrow bridge, was used from 1916 until 1986. Dewey Bridge really is a sweet little bridge, and I couldn't help resisting adding my little part to the donations to help maintain it. From Dewey Bridge, we drive on the north side of the river for several miles. Until eventually the Colorado River heads off to the west, off to Colorado, and we head north on Highway 128 across the desert out to Highway 70. After getting up on a plateau that the Highway 70 runs across, I drove just enough to make sure that this is the scenery that would be going on, and at that point I turned around and headed back south on Highway 128 going toward Moab. This highway we've been driving is called the Colorado River Scenic Byway from Interstate 70. We get back on the Colorado River. And I couldn't resist stopping by Dewey Bridge, beautiful little Dewey Bridge, here on the north side of the river, looking south. I wanted to show some sense of how narrow this beautiful little bridge that lasted from 1916 until 1986 actually is. That's when I remembered that my new camera not only takes movies, but you can put it on a time delay to give yourself about 10 seconds to get yourself in the picture. So here is your beer drinking guide, kind of having to scrunch himself up a bit in order to fit across the classic Dewey Bridge. It's fascinating to think that this bridge served until 1986. And now, folks, I have some heartbreaking news. You'll remember I pointed out that until April 10th of 2008, this was Utah's longest suspension bridge and longest clear span bridge. Unfortunately, the reason that this bridge no longer holds those titles is not because they built a larger bridge. When I was researching for information on the Dewey School, I learned that on April 10th, 2008, a fire that started in a nearby campground came and burnt this bridge across its entire span. Apparently, the fire was begun by kids playing with matches, although one report calls them vandals, so it may have been an intentional act. I am making this movie in July of 2008. As of this time, the steel cables and the steel towers are still there, but there are no plans to rebuild this beautiful piece of architecture and history. Innocent of knowing what would happen to the bridge, a year after I was there, I continued driving south and west on Highway 128. You will remember the rolling roads that were in the open valley area of this drive. I just couldn't help getting my camera out and hopefully giving you a little sense of how much fun it was to drive this wonderful roller coastery road. We're going about 45 miles an hour going into these curves. You'll see the Colorado River on the distance as we go into this next curve. And as we get to the straight stretch, we get to about 50, 55. I had actually driven through this section of the road and decided it was so much fun, I went back and started over just so I could take this film. I certainly hope you appreciate how much I suffer for you, dear viewers. Of course, the real advantage of doing this is I got to use the word roller coastery. And that's enough of that excitement. By this time in the afternoon, I was getting a bit hungry. So I saw a sign for Taylor Creek Ranch. And who can resist a sign that looks like this? That would be like trying to resist a birdhouse that looks like this. Here we have a few shots of the scenery around Taylor Creek Ranch. I can't imagine building those fences across that desert. And as we leave the Taylor Ranch, this little sign gives us a perfect spot to say goodbye to this week's Drive Moab. idea of beautiful little Dewey Bridge burning down, it just gets to me. It was such a beautiful bridge. But it did get me to thinking and doing a little more research into it. So at the risk of making this entire show into a travelogue, I am going to tell you about the rest of the story as I found it regarding Dewey Bridge. First of all, I have to apologize for getting the date wrong. I said that it happened on April 10th. In further research, I found out that it was Sunday, April 6th. We had observed that until 2008, this bridge was the longest suspension bridge and the longest clear span bridge in Utah. It was 500 feet long going across the Colorado River. During that 500-foot span, it was 8 foot wide. As we have observed, it was built to carry 6 horses, 3 wagons, and 9,000 pounds of freight. Built in 1916, it carried automobiles, jeeps, everything else up all the way until a new bridge was built in 1986. Records show it was actually used for 72 years, so apparently they kept it open for a couple years after the new bridge was built. So that's 72 years this little span served the traveling public. Rock climbing magazines tell about people's first experience driving across this bridge. So narrow they had to bring in the mirrors from the side of the Jeep, and they would get out in the middle of it and they couldn't help stopping and wiggling out of their Jeeps and look at the river going underneath them and the moon in the distance shining on the water. They said it was a very magic thing that they always looked forward to repeating every time they came back. Apparently, the hump that is in the middle of the bridge was high enough so that in Model Ts, people could not see if another car was coming on the bridge. Of course, at 8 feet, it was a one-lane bridge, so it was not unusual to get partway across, have to back up, and wait for other traffic to pass before you proceeded on your way. In 1916, they brought the material to build the bridge all the way from Chicago. The railroad, of course, was built by then, so probably the materials were brought by rail to the nearest railhead along the Union Pacific Main Line, and then brought by wagon to build this bridge. Over the years, the timbers had been creosoted over and over again to preserve them. The bridge sat neglected from 1986 until 1997, when Earl Sires, a county administrator, convinced the state to come up with $25,000 to help save it. The county was responsible for another $25,000. They couldn't come up with all of that, so a man named James Stoltzfus, Stoltzfus, came up with the remaining $12,000 to recondition the bridge for our enjoyment. The refurbishing began in 1999 and was finished in the year 2000. Obviously, many people loved this bridge. One of the main contributors to that was a lady named Jennifer Spears. At the time, there was a Dewey Bridge subdivision being developed, and she went in, bought all the land. She removed the roads and the infrastructure that had already been put in. She even removed one $600,000 house that had already been built in this subdivision so that she could return the land to what it originally looked like and make the Dewey Bridge a heritage for us all. The story of the destruction of this bridge actually began 200 years ago when, in the early 1800s, a plant named tamarisk was introduced to the country as a windbreak and as a decorative plant. Over the years, they have worked to keep the tamarisk back from this bridge. Different Boy Scouts and church groups would come and offer their time. Over the last few years, some of the tamarisk had been cleared, but it had been several years since the tamarisk right under the bridge had been cleared. It was then that this tamarisk got together with a 7-year-old boy from Grand Junction who had 2 or 3 matches. His family was picnicking near the bridge, and his parents did not notice that he had gone off to play off in the brush. Very quickly, a fire spread to 10 acres, and it spread to the creosote with which this bridge had been soaked. The site is so remote, it took 2 hours for firefighters to show up. By that time, the entire bridge was in flame. The years of creosote having soaked into the bridge made it a prime target for fire. There was nothing to do but watch it burn. Many people have expressed their heartbreak at the burning of this bridge, including one Fruita woman, a woman from Fruita, I believe is in Utah, who is quite angry because she remembers the ranchers going and burning the banks of this river to keep this tamarisk down, and it was something that had not been done in a while. People are looking into rebuilding the bridge, and you are welcome to Google up Dewey Bridge and see what you can do if you'd like to help. Replacement costs are estimated to be $1 million. That's not that much money these days, folks. I would like to take a special opportunity to thank John Lehman for letting me use his photographs of the destroyed bridge. I could not have gotten down and taken these myself, so I do appreciate his letting me use his photographs. And if you would like more information, do Google Dewey Bridge, D-E-W-E-Y Bridge, for more information. Also, there is a little YouTube movie of them removing the charred timbers if you wanted to check that out. You can find that on Google. I also welcome you getting hold of me at beerdrinker@greatwahoo.com, and I will be glad to send you web addresses if you'd like me to do that. And folks, that's this week's Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. As always, thanks for joining me. Next week, we're going to look into a cannon that blew out the side of the federal building that was right across the street from the Idaho State Capitol. And we'll be figuring out what that had to do with Boise High School, which just turned 100 years old. In the meantime, keep celebrating the Great Wahoo!